The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Darkest England by Idries Shah. 2. Cruel Lords. Unknown. There are no countries in the world less known by the British than these selfsame British islands. George Borrow, Lavengro.
Just wait until you get to England, that's the place to see.
I looked at the fat, middle-aged, sweating man of Middle Eastern appearance, in the English phrase, who had sat down beside me in the hotel lounge after telling the Nubian waiter to bring him a pot of tea. Khartoum that afternoon was very hot, over 112 degrees in the shade by the thermometer on the wall. The ceiling fans were feeble, and there was no air conditioning. The man must have heard my father and me speaking in English, something we often did in the East when we wanted to talk privately. The stranger's English was much worse than ours, but perhaps he had made a fair assumption that we had not yet been to England. For this was in the days before mass air travel, and we were both wearing the Arabian garb in which we had, only that morning, left Saudi Arabia. The Middle East seemed very small then. Only about 3 people on the peninsula, it was said, had been in England: Emir Faisal, the foreign minister, Sheikh Hafiz Wahba, the Saudi's London ambassador, and Sinjan Philby, the explorer, who ran a motor dealership in Jeddah. Bahana bekunem bego kina rafti, my father said to me in Dari Persian. Afghans often tease people when at a loose end, so I went along with his "let's have a joke, say you haven't been there." "What's it like in England, then?" I asked the newcomer, trying to make my voice eager for information and my face light up with anticipation. He smoothed his short beard with his right hand and screwed up his face, as if seeing the far horizons of a mysterious land.
England? Well, Manchester is sunny, the warmest place they have. It is a town very big, but the country is the best. It is all green.
"And what," I asked, wondering about Manchester but wanting to broaden the canvas, "happens in the countryside?"
You do not know that?
He turned a look of false amazement upon me and sucked at a gold tooth.
The countryside is full of castles. In those strongholds live cruel lords. They wear red coats and ride fierce horses, pursuing small brown animals. If they find no such prey, they turn their whips on the peasants, who pull handfuls of hair, forelocks, from their heads in sullen salutation. This obeisance is rigidly enforced.
Amazing. How could you have acquired such knowledge here in the Sudan? He wasn't going to be trapped into saying that he had actually been to England, but he wasn't prepared to admit that he hadn't either.
Ah, my friend, that is only a little of it. Now, that camera on its strap around your neck. Did you know that it was in England that they discovered how to use it? No, I thought not.
I was shaking my head in disbelief.
Well, it was found that there are certain minute creatures. Bacteria is their scientific name. These they capture and imprison in flasks until they have the film ready. Then they enter a room of darkness to preserve the secret, though I know it, and they throw the bacteria upon the film. Instantly the tiny ones chew away each part of the film which contains no picture, and a reverse image is revealed.
"But," I asked, "how do the bacteria know which parts to chew?" He leant back, his heavy-lidded eyes closed and his mouth turned up in a triumphant smirk.
They know because the glass at the front of the camera renders, by its nature, other parts of the picture inedible for such as the small insects which I have described.
And that is how a picture is made?
Not quite. I can see that you have little grasp of modern technology. When the film is ready, it is like glass, only soft, resembling cloth, and shiny. There is a further process. It is called the making it to paper. But that is one of the master secrets. I cannot tell everything of my knowledge to total strangers. No, of course not. Oh, by the way, which of them, the lords or the peasants, invented the photographic art? Neither. They could not. It was— He looked around conspiratorially. It was in England, but it was done by the Turks. People have pretended otherwise, but I know. After all, is not the word Kodak Turkish for little one, and are photographs not merely little ones of the original person or scene? Yes, you will learn a lot if you can only get to England. It was then that I thought that someday I would write a book and call it Darkest England. It proved to be more difficult to finish than I had expected. The Romans, so English people are fond of saying, called it a land of magic and mystery, yet at that time there was no such place as England in the British Isles. It was Prydain then, which may be Celtic and later meant Wales. The people were decorated in blue, the men called Brith, from the Welsh word to paint, and Bret means a Briton or Welshman. That is according to some authorities. But the redoubtable Dr. E. Brewer is sure that the word Britain is of Middle Eastern origin. By far the most probable derivation, he says in his dictionary, is from the Phoenician Baratanic, country of tin. There is a consensus about the word England, though. It is named after a village, Anglin, in today's Schleswig, North Germany. That, in turn, may come from the Latin for the people of the angle, the shape of their territory. Its warriors came here when they joined in with some Saxon freebooters in the 5th century. What we know as England was named, but not united, Mercia held out, by Egbert at Winchester in 829, or it may have been 925, for the experts are not agreed. The Middle Eastern discovery of Britain, in the Victorian sense, 19th century explorers were always discovering places such as Timbuktu, which were already known, was in the 9th century. This is recorded by Ibn Rustar, died 910. In the northern part of the ocean are 12 islands, he says, called the islands of Brataña. Why the Saxon Egbert should have christened his kingdom after the minority called Angles is just one of many puzzles. Places like Essex or Sussex, considered to be parts of England, did not belong to the Angles at all. The land strongly held by the Schleswigians embraced mainly Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia. The vagueness of the history highlights an important, almost a determining characteristic of the English today. They are given to shrugging off, or interpreting to vanishing point, anything they wish. England for the English is a state of mind, or one of many states of mind. All this wreaks a strange magic in the mind of the foreigner. As the shelves of many libraries show, it arouses in visitors a powerful urge to study the English and to write books on the phenomena they find. And this in spite of countless warnings by other foreigners that it is hazardous, like the dangers traditionally concealed in a quest for hidden treasure, the fountain of youth, or the philosopher's stone. Patrick Campbell says in A Short Trot with a Cultured Mind, "It seems to me that you can go sauntering along for a certain period, telling the English some interesting things about themselves, and then all at once it feels as if you had stepped on the prongs of a rake." I know exactly what he means. You find that you have booby-trapped yourself, and yet when you come to, after that blow on the head, you may well hear yourself saying, like Voltaire, "If I had had to choose my birthplace, I would have chosen England." The magic, the state of mind in England, and the minefields are all around us. It is not only foreigners who run into or come across them, or even that the influence is confined to the human species. As I started this book, I saw an item on independent television news. Thieves broke into a pet shop in Oxfordshire
and a rabbit, not knowing, or not caring, that it was not a guard dog, attacked them so fiercely that they fled empty-handed. No sooner had I absorbed that than I read how a family had been trapped in London by a herd of wild horses. I did not, throughout my wanderings, find any cruel lords, and there was little sun in Manchester while I was there. The bacteria which devour the emulsion on photographic film elude me still, but the reality of the land of the one-time Schleswigers proved to be even more astonishing than any of the promised wonders, by the way. Yes, by the way, you hear the phrase on all hands in England. It means incidentally, of course. People say this when they do not mean as a digression, though they may mean this at times. It has the advantage of prefacing diametrically opposite intentions. By the way, would you like a cup of coffee? Does indeed mean what it sounds like, but, by the way, I have a bone to pick with you, is altogether more sinister and really signifies there is something important, probably unpleasant, to discuss. Or again, it could be a mere jocularity. 3. Damage control. Someday I marvel. Britons and Romans, Saxons and then Danes, so many conquerors have taken it. I someday marvel any land is left. James F. Waite, Harold. Darkest England is very like parts of the East, not only in fauna and flora, but in the primate population. Primate, for the English, has 3 chief meanings, and it is to 2 of these that I refer: principal, and of the order which includes human beings. The other category, archbishops, has fewer members. Legend, whose custodians are the press, has it that they are all members of my club. The legend can only be dissolved by becoming a member. The more important mammal primates of England, as I have observed over the years, are those, regardless of location, geographical or social, who have what is known to them as common sense. It is their opinion which tends to prevail, especially when allied to aplomb or to one of the many other chief features of the creature. I recall a discussion between 3 heated Greeks and a couple of much cooler Englishmen at which I was present in the Petticoat Lane Market in London. Starting with a difference of opinion about the quality of some trifle of merchandise, it had engendered a broadside of words, directed by the most articulate of the sons of Homer towards an English stallholder. "You English," the Greek roared. "I know all about you. I was there in the Western Desert in the 1940s when you retreated and left some of us Greeks to take the fire of the Africa Corps 88s. The Cockney didn't have to say, he told me later, that he'd been a desert rat himself. I could almost see the jerboa flash of the 7th Armoured Division on his sleeve as he bawled back, "Well, what you gonna do, don't you, when them Jerrys is about? You just wants to keep your head down, that's what." Instantly all was still. Petticoat Lane returned to normal, and people drifted away as the Greek just stood there, his mouth hanging open. I've often thought of this incident, trying to work out if there could possibly have been a better, or more unexpected way of handling it. There is none. There is an interesting English phrase, to roll with the punches. But the English know a stage earlier than that. They don't let the punches connect. Common sense is needed, and found in my own part of the world in such matters as dealing with metaphysical madmen, cranks, and impostors. In its traditional form, the term Sufi stands for a person of such impeccable virtue and spiritual attainment that none may so style himself or herself and still be innocent of vanity. In other words, if you say you're one, you're not. But let it not be concealed from you that we, like you nowadays, are besieged by groups of near madmen, cultists, who imitate what they imagine to be Sufis, who caper and dress in weird clothes, sometimes taking great liberties with others, and generally behaving in a manner open to justifiable criticism. Instead of seeking power over themselves, they try to acquire control over others. Real Sufis, contrary to this systematic behavior, often assail such things as fixed thinking patterns, however laudable these may seem to the converted. The aim is to make room for fresh ideas. Among other things, this flexibility enables people to survive when there is a need to adjust to changed circumstances. What happens when these putative Sufis invade or arise in England? Not far from where I now sit, there is what is misnamed a settlement, it is very unsettled, centred on a house in southern England. There you will find strangely clad gambolling fools, led by a wiseacre in a tarbouche. English to a man and woman, they have convinced themselves, and even sections of the press, plus some Eastern residents here, that they are Sufis. When I recently approached their abode, embarrassed that the name of Sufi should be freely used by such as I could see marching and skipping up and down the village street, I noted a local rustic sitting outside the inn, nursing a pint of ale. I sat down beside him, and he said, with the kind of forbearance which bespeaks not only common sense but that propensity for becoming a Sufi which stems from seeing the good and shunning the evil, there be the Sufis, not right in the head at all, but they do have some lovely hives and dainty honey. The English people are perfectly all right unless their emotions are so tampered with that they develop fixations. I cannot say that I know how to prevent this, for it can occur, as it were, involuntarily. Even the most reputable and the most brilliant people may become irrationally attached to something. It does not have to be a cult. Look at the example of Sir Robert Watson Watt. Although he developed radar for the defense of Britain during the Second World War, he was passionately opposed to neutralizing the German radar defending the Third Reich. But why? Because according to Professor R.V. Jones in his Most Secret War, it hurt him emotionally to think of radar being neutralized, even German radar. This statement, not an isolated one, may contain a clue to the problem and its solution. Watson Watt did not see the humour of his situation. Lack of humour often goes with absence of common sense. I choose here a more recent example out of several dozen clipped from the papers. Professor Abdus Salam is director of the International Centre of Theoretical Physics and a professor of physics at Imperial College London. His daughter, explaining one of his theories to a teacher at her English school, was told to abandon it or she would fail her A-level physics examination. She did fail, and has now taken to the study of Oriental languages. A few people in England, probably the darkest parts, seem to believe that dedication or obsession with trivial rules is the same as proper diligence or commitment to a cause. They are untypical. This can be seen in such affairs as a recently reported assault in London. 2 men chased a mugger, who had attacked an elderly woman, into a railway station, where they were turned back at the barrier because they had no tickets. They were not allowed to telephone the police either. Finally, they bought platform tickets and caught the thief. Common sense can be allied to persistence so as to get things done. Indeed, some English people believe that it should be the test for anyone before being encouraged to espouse a cause. There is a lesson in the case of Harry Wright, a market gardener of Cottingham near Hull in northern England. In the 1950s, the Tomato and Cucumber Marketing Board, obsessed by rules, decided to ban the sale of bent cucumbers in Britain. The campaign against this bureaucracy became a national one. Mr. Wright did not plant bombs, make impassioned logical speeches, or organize street clashes. Instead, he dressed as Guy Fawkes or as an undertaker to raise questions at meetings of the board. when he was fined for such unlawful behaviour, he refused to pay. Court-appointed bailiffs seized goods from him and sold his equipment, but members of the public bought back his possessions and returned them to him. I admit that the courts were English, but there are many people in England who insist on calling them the courts, caught, no doubt, by humourless mechanicality. Getting caught in England, in one sense or another, seems to be all too easy, especially if you are too serious, something which the English really dislike. If I asked you whether you thought Maud Ray was a woman's name or a coded message, what would you answer? The reason I asked is because I find another episode in English history instructive in showing the mentality of the court. The eminent scientist, Dr. later Sir John Cockcroft, received a message from his colleague, the equally brilliant physicist Niels Bohr, in December 1940, saying that he and his wife were well in German-occupied Denmark. Would Cockcroft inform Maud Ray? Cockcroft immediately set about decoding this message, which contained no code at all. Maud Ray was simply the Danes' former governess, who lived in Kent. Intellectuals, scholars and scientists are often alleged to adhere to the principle known as Occam's razor. This has been expressed as entier non sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatem. In the English vernacular, don't make a meal of it. Choose the simplest explanation for anything. Not so Dr. John Cockcroft. He looked at the phrase and rearranged the letters of "Please inform Maud Ray Kent." The message was now much more interesting. He decided that the Dane had really been trying to convey the words radium taken. This could only mean that the Germans had seized Dr. Bohr's radium. 3 years or so later, when Bohr reached England, he anxiously asked whether his message had reached the worried old lady in Kent. As one Englishman told me recently, "Common sense can be operated as a sort of damage control method, don't you know?" But we can be sure that Bohr, if not Maud Ray, had a good laugh about all this. I am convinced of it because of a typical anecdote about the Danish scientist which Cockcroft may well not have heard, which gives us a clear advantage over him. A visitor, noting a horseshoe nailed up outside Bohr's house, asked how a physicist could believe that there was such a thing as magic and rely on lucky horseshoes. "I understand," replied the scientist, "that they work whether you believe in them or not." There is an English-type riposte, if ever I heard of one. Don't let the punch connect. And if you want a crash course on this, just watch, on your television screen almost any day, one of their politicians wordily answering, with great affability, the question which the interviewer has not asked him. Millions of the watching English are silently absorbing the technique. Each of them will use it one day. Judging things too rapidly, bypassing common sense, is nowadays a temptation when instant reactions are expected from experts. The communications explosion insists on speed, and some people in England do get stampeded by its demands. I once wrote a book which was published in 274 pages, which would ordinarily be expected to contain some 90,000 words. It was bound in red with gold lettering, but the total text occupied no more than 1,326 words, occupying 14 pages. Some reviewers thought that the book of the book must be a hoax, others that there was something wrong with the typesetting. Some bookshops sent their orders back, asking for complete copies. Only 5 reviews noted that the story in the book was about quality and not quantity. Critics in 2 London Sunday papers, being weeklies, their reviewers have time to read books before writing about them, understood what it was about and praised it. As the Eastern saying by the sage Hilali has it, one person who understands is worth 100 who merely obey a custom. The Sunday Telegraph, very English, found it to be an extraordinary psychological test in that it predicts the complete range of possible responses to itself. I didn't catch the observer out either. Idries Shah is of course not a joker nor a crank, but a distinguished authority on Sufism, some of whose other books have been hailed as books of the year. Very kind, and showing that some reviewers do read books. But quite a lot of papers sniffed at the book of the book. A typical remark was, "Large sales can hardly be expected for the book of the book." I'll spare their blushes and not name them. One sat on the fence. That review earned a place in an excellent anthology, Funny Convulsing and Funny Confusing, assembled by Dennis Parsons, and I am sure that this helped the book's sales. So far it has gone into 5 impressions, and a 6th is planned. Common sense operates as damage control and requires patience and coolness. This, in turn, needs an impassive outward face. Luigi Barzini, the Italian journalist, spent a long time in England and tried hard to understand its people. In his The Europeans, he speaks of the banal truisms offered by distinguished men instead of wisdom, and his initial belief that the English, like most Nordic people, were not very sharp as a whole. One of his great problems was to separate the dull from the acute. In the end, he says, I concluded that there was no sure way to ascertain if an Englishman was intelligent or stupid. Mr. Barzini's assumptions may stand in his way. An Englishman can behave as stupidly as anyone if he allows his emotions to rule him, as did Cockcroft or Watson Watt, neither of them stupid men. Hence the damage which common sense prevents. An Englishman will behave as intelligently as anyone else if his feelings are not allowed to gain the upper hand. To assume that there are intelligent and stupid English people by looking at instances and not at the whole canvas is, for me, flawed. But I must admit that I am still puzzling over a notice by an eminent critic describing deadpan the contents of one of my heavier non-fiction books. He delineates the theme and thrust admirably, but the piece is headed, Among the New Novels. One and the same action by an Englishman may be misunderstood as evidence of extreme boorishness, of cunning, or great subtlety. It can also be used as an instrument of state. Mr. later Earl Attlee gave me a remarkable example, characteristically refraining from interpreting it. A certain scholar had successfully carried out a tricky advisory job for the government during Attlee's premiership. Called to 10 Downing Street to receive the prime ministerial thanks, he had intimated that he would very much like an Oxford chair. I told him I'd do what I could, Attlee said, and I was able to write to him 2 weeks later in the following terms. Oxford chairs, my staff have ascertained, are not up to much these days. I have therefore arranged to have a chair sent to you which was made in High Wycombe, which is not far from Oxford, and, as you will know, is the centre of the English furniture industry. Deliberately misunderstanding the other person is an English technique of deflation or humour, or it can be both. One keen observer of the English was the Nepalese ambassador to the court of St. James's, General Shankar Shamshayung Bahadur Rana. His titles translate as Prince Brave Warsword, and he felt that his Gurkha people resembled the English in their eccentricity. My personal name is Shankar. 2/3 of my Nepalese titles are in Persian, though we've never had anything to do with Persia, he said to me one day. This brought him to the English misunderstandings with humour technique. There is one old and allegedly true story, he said, about 2 Englishmen who had just finished, with gusto, a sheep's head dinner. The first Englishman said, "Long live sheep's head." This gave the other one his chance to assail his companion's egocentricity and to call him an animal at the same time. The second wagged his finger at him. "Vanity, sir, vanity," he said. Foreigners, including the Irish, French, and Americans, love to make sweeping statements about the English indigenes and the matter of common sense. It rather takes the heat out of things when one sees that they can have diametrically opposed opinions on the matter. George Bernard Shaw damns the whole lot of them. No Englishman has any common sense, or ever had, or ever will have, he says in John Bull's Other Island. Emerson, the American, quoting the Frenchman Montesquieu, weighs in with the exact opposite. No people have true common sense but those who are born in England. But Sir William Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan, a real Englishman even though his middle name was Schwenk, shows us the real link between heatedness and sense in Iolanthe. On fire that glows with heat intense, I turn the hose of common sense, and out it goes, at small expense. Now that's what I call damage control. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.